Appalachia, word that evokes a whole passel of reactions. Everything from the beauty of a mountaintop to trailer parks, drugs, and about everything in between. The Appalachian Mountains are indeed the oldest mountains in the world. They once towered 30,000 feet into the air. They stretch from eastern Canada through 14 states all the way to Louisiana. The folks that live in these mountains have faced an unending number of tragic and just plain odd happenings that cry out for the telling. Hello, I'm Larry Bentley, and I was born and raised in these very mountains by a family who themselves were born, raised, and lived for generations in the heart of the Appalachian Mountain. Come with me and we'll take a look at some of the unending stories that came from within my beloved mountains, and we'll look through the eyes of an Appalachian at some from outside the area as well. Welcome to Season 5 of Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend. Howdy, my good friends. Hope you're doing well today. Thank you so much for stopping by. You know, we talk right smart about haints and murderers on this show, and we discuss odd stuff, going on or maybe living in the mountains. But sometimes the most fearsome monster ain't got no horns or tail. Sometimes the true terror is something made by man, maybe a slow-acting monster that just festers. Today we're going to be heading out of the mountains. We got to haul it all down to a road a piece, over to flatlands of eastern Virginia, right near the James River, a town called Hopewell. Now, some folks down there might not call themselves mountain folk, but when a mess this big gets made, when a body gets burnt this bad by somebody else's greed, well, it bleeds into all our history, don't it? We're fixing to talk about a disaster that was plumb sure a slow-motion murder, one dose of dust at a time. Special thanks to Mary Agarinicus for suggesting this one. I hope I didn't butcher your name too bad there, Mary. But I remember this one well. So have yourself a sit down, grab a drink. Well, even after you hear this story, you might want to check what's floating in it. But let me tell you about the devil dust of Hopewell. Now, before we get into it, I got to tell you about the place called Hopewell, Virginia. Back in the day, they called it the chemical capital of the South. Now, that's a title, that looks real shiny and nice up on the billboard, but it smells mighty different when you actually live there. I know because my family and, for a couple of years back when I was a little feller, when my dad got laid off from his normal job, we lived there for a spell. Even back in the First World War, DuPont was packing what they called gun cotton back then. It's a town built on bubbling vats and smokestacks. Now, by the 70s, about everywhere you went in Hopewell, the air tasted like pennies and burnt rubber. Folks used to say you could smell the payroll in the air. It was a company town through and through, and if you didn't work at one of the plants, your daddy did, or maybe your uncle did, and you didn't bite the hand that fed you because you were probably going to grow up and do the same thing. Back in the early 70s, the big chemical company called Allied Chemical was aiming to get away from making a powerful pesticide that they called Keep-On. Now, Allied wasn't run by morons. They were sharp as a tack and about twice as flat-headed. They knew Keep-On was good for killing ants and roaches, specifically the banana root borer down in the tropics and the potato beetle over in Europe. But they also knew it was nasty stuff, real nasty stuff. Nasty enough to want to pawn the making of it off on somebody else while still making the regular trips to the bank to deposit the profits from it. Using Keep-On to kill ants and roaches was akin to using chemotherapy to get a nice haircut. It was a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. But here's the rub. Allied knew the feds were starting to sniff around about Keep-On, and the EPA was getting its legs under it back in, and the writing was pretty much on the wall for them. Allied wanted to keep selling the stuff because it made money hand over fist, but they didn't want the liability that went with it. They didn't want the unions breathing down their necks about safety. So what does a big company do when it's got a dirty job and it don't want to get its hand dirtied with none of it? Well, it goes out and finds itself a patsy. Well, here we have the two patsies enter the scene, Virgil Huntroft and William Moore. Now, these weren't strangers off the street. They were Allied Chemical alumni. They knew the game, they knew the score. They set up a little outfit called Life Science Products. Now, Life Science Products, well, that sounds fancy, I guess, enough, don't it? Sounds like a place with clean white lab coats and stainless steel vats. But I'm here to tell you that it was all a lie wrapped in a deception. Allied subcontracted the whole dirty mess to that little company. You want to know what the factory was? Well, it was a converted gas station. No, I'm not lying. An old rocket gas station sitting right in the middle of a residential neighborhood across from a dadgum 7-Eleven. They took out the gas pumps and put in chemical grinders. It was jerry-rigged, slapped together with baling wire, duct tape, bubble gum, and a whole heap of hope. They were set up to fail, but they were too greedy to give a very little rat's rump. The life science plant started churning out to keep on in early 1974. They were making 6,000 pounds of that stuff every day. That's right, folks, I said 6,000 pounds. All inside a space not much bigger than a double-wide trailer. And where did a bunch of that powder end up? You know, the waste from making it? Well, yeah, better question would be where the heck didn't it go? Because, folks, that shit went everywhere. Now, picture this. You're a young man, maybe 20 years old or so. You got a family to feed. You hear about this new place hiring, paying a decent wage, and you walk in, and the first thing you notice is a haze. The workers, poor folks, were looking for a good job with a decent pay, and they didn't even know they were handling a serious poison. They weren't given a lick of personal protection, not a mask, no gloves, nothing. Maybe a paper dust mask if they were lucky to bring one. The kind you'd wear to sand a piece of drywall or something, which against keep on is about as useful as a screen door in a submarine. They walked through puddles of the stuff. Their machinery was caked in it a half-inch thick at times. It was a fine white or maybe a brownish gray looking powder, and it hung in the air like fog. Workers used to call it the snow. They'd sit there in their lunch break, opening up a sandwich, and the dust would settle on their bologna. They'd be drinking coffee with a film of poison on top of it. They were eating their supper right off their tables at home, covered with keep-on dust. When the shift was over, they didn't even have showers at work half the time, so naturally it followed the workers home on their clothes. They'd go home and, hug their wives and play with their babies, still covered in the devil dust. Their wives would wash clothes, and the water in the washing machine would turn milky white. That poison was getting into the upholstery, the carpets, and the very air in their houses. At the plant, when they cleaned up their areas, they didn't know any better than to sweep the stuff right down into the sewer drains, or they'd just pile it up outside the back door where the wind would blow it all over the neighborhood. The plant was a plumb gummed up, dusty mess. When you're making fine powder without dust collection, you're pretty much pissing up a tree to try to keep anything clean to start with. They were telling the workers, "Don't you worry, it's harmless. It's just bug killer." But folks, a bug killer can drop a potato beetle dead in its tracks. Ain't going to be kind to a human liver. Wasn't too long before they were all coughing and feeling like they were kicked their way out of a grave or something. Now, a thing like poison can't be kept a secret forever. The body keeps the score. Keep on wasn't something your body could just shake off. It's what the eggheads call bioaccumulative. That means it checks in, but it don't check out. It actually builds up in your liver, your fat, and your brain. It attacks the myelin sheath, and that's the insulation of your nerves. It strips your wires bare. And here's a number specifically for nightmares. It's got a half-life of 700 years. Yes, folks, I said 700 years. In case there's any questions, half-life is the time required for the amount of an active substance to be reduced by 1/2. Yeah, I read that definition out of a book. Now, it means that if you spill a bucket of it today, in the year 2600, half that bucket's still going to be waiting to kill something. In other words, these folks were up a creek without a paddle, and heck, they didn't even know it. Allied Chemical and its alumni sure did. That would be why they pawned it off on the poor folks in Hopewell. That way they could make the profit without being held accountable for the damage. Well, at least I figure that's what the plan was. In 1975, the workers started getting real bad. Started real subtle, maybe a little twitch in the eye, a little trouble holding a coffee cup steady, but then it grew. They developed what they called the keep-on shakes, uncontrollable tremors, their heads bobbing back and forth like a dashboard doll, their eyes darting around, what doctors called obscutaneous, chaotic eye movements that they couldn't stop. They couldn't help it. They had chest pains. Their livers were swelling up so big that you could feel them sticking through their ribs. And worst of all, for the young men wanting to be a daddy or have a family, men were going completely sterile. The sperm count on the men dropped to 0. The bodies were ruined. They went to the company fellers, Huntoft and Moore, and complained, "Boss, I can't stop shaking. Boss, I can't sleep." You know what the company told them? They looked these hard-working men in the eye and said, "Well, you just drunks. You're drinking too much on the weekends." Imagine that. You're suffering a nervous breakdown from poison. Your body is vibrating so hard you can't walk straight. And the man killing you tells you you're a no-account drunk. That's that right there. Well, I guess that makes me hotter than a cast iron skillet on a wood stove. But the truth had its way to bubbling to the top, just like swamp gas. One of the workers, a man named Dale Gilbert, he got so bad that he couldn't ignore it. He went to a local doctor. Now, his doctor, Dr. Chow, he was plumb flustered. He never seen anything like it. He sent Gilbert to a specialist, a cardiologist named Dr. Jackson. Now, Dr. Jackson didn't know keep-on from a poke full of poke salad, but he knew something was mighty wrong. He saw the man twitching and jumping and ribs hurting, liver swollen, and he took a blood sample. That there's where the nail got smacked directly on the head. Dr. Jackson, he sent the blood sample all the way to the Centers for Disease Control down in Atlanta. And that's when the haint finally stepped out of the dark and showed itself. The CDC ran their tests, and I reckon the technician probably dropped the beaker on the floor when he saw the results. They called Dr. Jackson back, wondering if the sample was tainted or something. They said they'd never seen such a high level of toxic chemical in a living human being before. It was plumb off the charts. They had their answer. It was keep-on poisoning. Acute, massive, and real. The state health officials finally woke up. They went down to Life Science Products in July of 1975. Now picture this, these health inspector bureaucrats in their suits. They walk up on this converted gas station. The windows are coated in dust. They walk inside, and it's like walking into a snow globe of death. They looked at the men coming off their shift, twitching their way out the door with a slurred speech, looking like they were walking on the deck of a ship in a storm. And it didn't take them about the time it takes to turn around and lock the door to shut the place down right then and there. 76 workers were diagnosed with poison, more than half the folks who'd ever worked there from the get-go. Some of them had to be hospitalized on the spot. They found keep-on in the wives. They even found it their children. Now, if the story ended there, it would already be tragedy enough, but folks, this mess had legs. It walked right out the back door and jumped in the James River. You see, the poisoning didn't stop working just because the doors were shut. The James River, which was a lifeline to many for generations of folks, a place where the men fished for shad and oysters to feed their kin, well, it had been taking the waste from the plant for over a year. Life Science Products had been dumping thousands of pounds of waste right into, of all things, the Hopewell sanitary sewer system. And not just them, Allied Chemical had been dumping their own mess for years before that. Of course, it was mostly in secret. I say mostly because I imagine some heads just might turn away from, to look at dollar signs instead of maybe seeing a mess like this. Now, the city's sewer system was the first to kiss the baby goodbye. The Keep-On was so potent it killed all the bacteria in the water treatment plant, and the digesters just stopped digesting. The sewer plant became a gobbed up, broke down mess. So what happened then? That poison kept moving right on down the sewer pipes, bypassing the treatment and spewing straight into the James River and out toward the Chesapeake Bay. Investigators started testing the river. They found high levels of Keep-On in the river sediment. They found it in the fish, they found it in the blue crabs, and in the oysters. The soil around the plant itself was thick with the stuff. Even a block away, the dust on the ground was found to be 40% pure Keep-On. Think about that. The dirt was almost half poison. In December of 1975, the governor had to do something drastic. He shut down the James River to commercial fishing. I remember that one. I had cousins who fished there for years, and they got hit hard. In the mountains, if they close the mines, the town dies. Down there, you close the river, and the waterman dies. It was a huge, crippling blow to the good folks that made their living on that river. That ban lasted for 13 years for some species. The fishing industry was plumb ruined. People were feared to eat anything, any kind of seafood from Virginia for years and years. A way of life handed down from father to son since the colonies was cut off at the knees because some executives wanted to save a few bucks on disposal fees. So what happened to the villains of our story? Well, the patsies who ran Life Science, Mr. Moore and Mr. Huntoft, they were fined and served a little time, though not nearly enough to match the suffering they caused. But the big company, Allied Chemical, the one pulling the strings, well, they got dragged into court. It was a David and Goliath fight, but this time Goliath got popped in the head with his rock, and he'd poisoned his own foot. They got hit with a massive fine for violation of federal environmental laws, over $13 million. In the mid-'70s, that was the biggest fine ever leveled for environmental pollution. Now, a lot of folks might reckon that $13 million ain't near enough to make up for a lifetime of pain and sterility and liver damage and even the knowledge of the toxic chemicals in your blood and in your lungs and very well in the soil where your youngins play. And I'd agree with you. Money don't buy back your health. Money don't fix a shaky hand. But that fine, well, it did do one thing. It was good. A judge named Judge Robert Mehring, well, he was a man with a stern jaw and a sense of justice. He allowed a portion of that money to be used to create the Virginia Environmental Endowment. It was a new idea. Instead of just giving the money to the government, he put it back in the river. That endowment is still working today to make the water safer. But to Keep-On, the ghost of that poison is still down there. It's heavier than water, so it sinks. It's still in the sediment of the James River, buried deep under the mud, waiting, for every time a big hurricane comes through and churns up that bottom real good, scientists really get nervous. The long-term health effects on people, the workers eventually got some of the shake out of their system thanks to a drug that was actually made for cholesterol that helped bind the poison and move it out of their system a little bit. But the cancer rates, the liver issues, and it's still a mystery that's unfolding even today. It's a legend that just chills you to the bone, folks. It ain't about a Mothman or a Wampus cat. It's a story of what happens when greed is the only God folks are following. And the Hopewell Keep-On disaster teaches us that sometimes the true evil ain't a creature in the dark. It's men with a well-lit boardrooms who tell you the dust on your floor is just harmless while they watch you shiver and walk away to clean it up. Now, we know that the water that flows out of our mountains runs down to places like Hopewell. We're all connected. The poison in that river don't care about county lines. And watch what's in your air and what you're breathing and in the water you're drinking. And if a man in a suit comes up and tells you that snow in the middle of summer is it's safe to eat, well, you tell him I said, go ahead and take your first bite there, Mr. Suit Man. I hope you got something out of our story today. If you did, please rate and review the podcast. Or if you're watching on Spotify, YouTube, or Rumble, throw us a like and don't forget to subscribe, follow wherever you watch or listen. Come on over to Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend podcast group on Facebook where we talk Appalachian or about anything else you want to talk about. I'll be back real soon with another Appalachian Murder, Mystery, or Legend, and I will see you then.